The first time I met him, he was standing in front of the data visualization wall like it was a damn aquarium, staring at it, nodding like he understood a single byte crawling across that screen. He tilted his head, squinted like he was admiring a Rothko, then turned to the room and said, "We need to turn this into a story, a compelling one. Numbers without narrative are just static." Everyone nodded. I didn't. I just made a mental note. We'd hired a peacock to do a welder's job. He introduced himself with a handshake like a limp fish and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Call me Jace," he said, drawing out the name like it was a brand. I caught a whiff of something expensive and stupid, maybe sandalwood and vanilla, with notes of middle management delusion. He wore this ridiculous smile, like he was auditioning to be your favorite boss in a sitcom no one watches. I watched him scan the room, marketing, design, sales, and then he landed on us. Engineering, infrastructure, the unpretty backbone of the whole operation. "We'll need to do a full audit of your workflows," he said, waving his hand like a priest dismissing sin. "Efficiency is my middle name." I wanted to ask if inflated ego was his first. I've been at this firm for over 13 years, built the guts of it from scratch when we were still renting cloud space by the gigabyte and using spreadsheets as databases. I've onboarded 6 CTOs, outlived 4 CEOs, and mentored a dozen engineers now working for companies that buy us out of problems. I don't care for politics, happy hours, or explaining to someone with a business degree why server uptime isn't optional. I care that our systems work, every hour, every update, every anomaly patched before anyone outside the room even knows it existed. But Jace didn't care about the guts. Jace wanted the vibe. On his second day, he made the rounds like a contestant on some corporate edition of The Bachelor. Tossed compliments like crumbs. "Love the energy in here. This team really gets it. We're gonna break some paradigms, folks." His words evaporated on contact like cheap cologne. When he reached my corner of the floor, the part without mood lighting or beanbags, he squinted at the server topology map I had up on my screen. "And this is, what exactly?" "Live network status," I said without turning. "That's the core routing overlay plus active load balancing for whoa," he cut in, hands up like I'd drawn a gun. "You're gonna have to dumb it down for me. I don't speak Klingon." He laughed at his own joke. I didn't, neither did anyone else. He looked around, still smiling, like we were all supposed to be charmed by his humility. "You know," he said, pointing at my screen, "we need to translate this kind of stuff for the wider org. Make it digestible. Make it sexy." I finally looked at him. "You're talking about infrastructure." "Exactly," he said, missing the sarcasm like it was a high-speed train. "You know that look people get when they realize you're not going to kiss their ass? That twitch in the smile, that slight narrowing of the eyes." I watched it happen in real time. From that moment on, I knew what I was to him, a relic, a blocker, someone to work around. The problem was Jace didn't understand what he didn't understand. He thought the blinking lights in the server room were just that, lights. He thought our monthly risk reports were optional reading. He thought cloud meant someone else's responsibility. And worst of all, he assumed I was just another technical grunt with no business sense, no leverage, and no spine. That week, he scrapped our quarterly disaster simulation drill because it sounded alarmist. "Come on," he said in the all hands. "Do we really think the whole system would go down at once? That's like planning for an alien invasion." No one laughed. I glanced across the room to see if anyone else had just mentally quit their job. One of my engineers, Samir, was squeezing his water bottle so hard the plastic buckled. Another, Margot, was blinking rapidly like she just stepped into an open flame. We were all thinking the same thing. He's going to break something and we'll be the ones blamed for it. Still, I kept my face neutral. I nodded when required. I even clapped when he ended the meeting with his trademark "let's disrupt mediocrity," yeah? But in private, I started combing through our recovery protocols. I made backups of backups. I double-checked the access controls and logged every change he made, even the ones through his proxy assistants, because I've seen men like Jace before. They come in loud, rearrange the furniture, fire the wrong people, and leave just before the floor caves in. And when it does, they blame the architect, so I built a failsafe, quietly, cleanly, without fuss. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance. And Jace? He was the reason the premium kept going up. The memo came at 7:12 a.m., timestamped like a death certificate. Subject line: "In for streamlining proposal, immediate cost saves." It was one of those PDFs that smells like middle management perfume, vague diagrams, a bar chart with no y-axis labels, and phrases like low-hanging fruit and opportunity buckets. Page 2 was where the knife slid in. "Phase out secondary UPS backups in Data Wing B. Primary supply has been uninterrupted for 3+ years. ROI not demonstrable." I stared at it so long my coffee went cold. He was cutting our redundant power systems. Let me be clear, those backups weren't luxury items. They weren't nice-to-haves like standing desks or catered Thursdays. They were there because 4 years ago, a squirrel nested in a utility relay and half the grid hiccuped like it had the flu. Our systems stayed up. Not because of luck. Because of planning, because of me. Jace didn't know that story. He didn't ask. Later that morning, during a meeting that felt more like a drive-by than a discussion, he smiled and said, if the Titanic had better budget controls, they might have skipped the extra lifeboats, but think of the savings. The room laughed. Nervously, I didn't. Actually, I said without looking up from my notes, the Titanic didn't have enough lifeboats. That was the problem. Exactly, he chirped. Different times. Modern systems don't need so much redundancy. We've got SLAs, cloud auto-scaling, mirrored disks. He didn't finish the sentence. Probably because he realized, belatedly, that he didn't know what any of those words actually meant together, like a toddler stringing together grown-up sounds. That same week, he rejected my quarterly security audit, claimed it was overkill and fear-based thinking. We were wasting precious developer hours testing edge case vulnerabilities. You think hackers care about us? We're not Google. We're not sexy enough to hack. Margot turned to me afterward and whispered, should we send out an invite to ransomware gangs? Save them the trouble of finding us? I started documenting everything. Not just logs, I mean everything. Every email he sent that ignored our alerts. Every Slack message where he brushed off our concerns. Every budget line redacted without explanation. Every time he signed off on vendor access without clearing it through the architecture team. I built a folder, local, encrypted, mirrored to a cold storage device in my desk drawer. I labeled it policy reference, but in my head I called it the ARC. Because when this thing went down, and it would, I wanted proof we told him. Over and over again. In writing, on record. The cascade had already started, just didn't hear the rattle. He approved an update to the CI/CD pipeline that broke container versioning, left us one bad push away from production outages. He removed our daily rollbacks to reduce server churn. He forwarded a phishing email to finance, thinking it was an invoice. I spent my evenings correcting his damage like a janitor cleaning up after a parade of toddlers. Quietly, invisibly. Because if I didn't, something would break. Not metaphorically. Literally, systems, access, revenue. He sent out a company-wide email celebrating a 2% drop in infrastructure costs. A huge win, he called it. Optimization in action. Meanwhile, our latency metrics were crawling. Support tickets were stacking. And the overnight dev team was complaining about random access denials from the automation cluster. Jay said it was a permissions bug. I knew better. It was entropy. Systemic. And it was his fault. He started pushing for what he called a visual modernization of the admin dashboard. Said it looked too sterile. Wanted animated charts. Bright colors, something with pop. Samir asked him, do you want it to be useful, or do you want it to be cute? Jay said, why not both, because this wasn't a toy. This was the control center for $200M portfolio management engine. That was the moment I stopped trying to change his mind. You can't argue with a peacock about architecture. You can't explain to someone who's never fixed a leaking pipe why duct tape doesn't belong on a pressurized valve. You just wait for the bang. And then you show them the manual they never read. I updated the disaster recovery protocol that night. Didn't change much, just moved the escrowed keys into a separate holding clause, one that triggers when a senior officer voids critical infrastructure redundancy without consensus from engineering. Legal signed off on it automatically. It looked like a standard compliance update. Just another boring line in a document no one reads. But it meant one thing, and one thing only. When this ship starts sinking, I control the lifeboats. He booked the room under the title Infrastructure Pulse Check, which sounded innocuous enough, like maybe we'd be discussing uptime metrics or deployment velocity. I walked in expecting a half-baked pep talk and maybe another speech about synergy. What I got was a firing squad and business casual. He sat at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, coffee in one hand, bullshit grin in the other. Around him were 3 junior engineers, 2 analysts from DevOps, and his favorite parrot from HR, Kristen, one who says just trying to be a culture ambassador right before she files a performance flag on someone for tone. Let's keep this casual, Jace started, flipping through a thin dossier with my name on it. Just want to get a sense of where we're all at. What's working, what's legacy? I didn't sit. I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed, watching him stumble through his own fake charm. He began with the usual theater. A couple compliments about team output. A shallow nod to the migration we pulled off 6 months ago without a single minute of downtime. Then he pivoted. But one of the things I've been hearing, he said, stretching the word like a yoga instructor on Adderall, is that we may be overallocating technical resources in some areas. Maybe clinging to old protocols. Maybe being too cautious. He glanced at me like we were in on the same joke. We weren't. Amara, you've been with the company, what? Decade plus. 13 years, I said. 4 CTOs, 6 different audit frameworks, 2 physical relocations, 0 infrastructure breaches under my watch. Right? He nodded, mock impressed, which is amazing, truly. But sometimes those long tenures come with, how do I say it, a little rigidity? A reluctance to evolve. He smiled, looked at the juniors, and added like I checked, we're still running our own private certificate authority for internal service comms. Isn't that a little retro? I stared at him deadpan. It's also the reason your platform hasn't been hijacked by a 5-line MIDM script. Kristen shifted in her chair, clearly uncomfortable. One of the juniors, Jacob, looked down at his laptop like he was ashamed to be breathing the same air. Jace laughed. See, passion, I love it, but passion needs balance. And to be honest, Amara, when I reviewed your salary, well, it raised some eyebrows, especially when we compare output versus cost. There it was, the knife, sloppy but sharp enough. And listen, he continued, no one's saying you haven't earned your spot, but maybe it's time to think about how we make space for new voices. New frameworks, more modern tools. He might as well have said, you're expensive, old, and in the way. I didn't respond. I just looked at the file he was holding, thin, mostly printouts from HR and budget spreadsheets with red lines through them. He hadn't even read my audit logs, my architecture notes, or the compliance risk memos I'd authored. He wasn't evaluating performance. He was laying a narrative, one he could use when the layoffs came. I walked out before he finished talking. Didn't slam the door, didn't mutter a word, just left. Back at my desk, I opened my private vault drive. Inside was a document I wrote years ago, buried deep in a compliance update from our SOC2 renewal, an obscure clause about authorization escrow. Meant for use only in the event of technical reorganization or a critical role reassignment, it allowed me to trigger a fail-safe protocol that moved root key custody into legal escrow. It froze access. It locked down escalation paths, could only be reversed by a majority board vote or a CISO override, and Jace wasn't the CISO. He didn't even know how to spell it. I triggered it, quietly, cleanly. The script ran in under 12 seconds, no alerts, no pop-ups, just a deep system event logged under an innocuous maintenance task titled Auth Mirror Policy Rotation SH. Then I sent one email to legal. Subject, Policy Activation Auth Custody Transfer. No commentary, no signature. They replied 8 minutes later. Received and acknowledged. Secure escrow engaged. Custody chain recorded. I stared at that sentence like it was oxygen. It wasn't just legalese, it was leverage. My system, my architecture, was now running under a key no one could touch unless the board explicitly approved it. And that meant when it broke, and it would, no one could fix it without me. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty, cold, like I'd just buried something that used to matter. I'd tried for months to meet him halfway. I softened my tone in emails. I dumbed down language. I rewrote the same warning memos 6 different ways, hoping one of them would make it through his skull. None of it mattered, so I stopped hoping. I started preparing. Let the peacock strut. Let him swing his buzzwords like a toddler with a stick. I had the keys, I had the logs. I had the backup plans no one else even knew existed. He wanted a modern system? Good. Let's see how modern he feels when the lights go out. The joke hit the air like a slap. All this just to look pretty? My daughter's nightlight does more, Jace said, finger jabbing toward the server rack like he was pointing at a pile of trash. We were in the main data room, not a flashy space. Just cold floors, blue LEDs, and the constant, whispering hum of servers doing things he'd never understand. It smelled faintly of dust and ozone, like every air-conditioned room that quietly runs the world. This was the heart of it, the lungs, the veins, the bones, and he had the gall to compare it to a $14 plug-in from Target. I was sitting 10 feet away, legs crossed, laptop open on my knees, running diagnostics, monitoring packet flow, watching for anomalies in a system I designed to be invisible until the moment you needed it. And now here was this grinning clown with department store charisma, waving his ignorance around like it was charming. He didn't even hear how quiet it got. Not just quiet, dead. Margot stopped typing. Jacob's chair creaked as he froze mid-swivel. Samir looked down at the floor like maybe he'd find his will to live in the scuff marks. Jace was still talking. Something about aesthetics. Something about how tech should inspire confidence and nobody's impressed by blinking lights anymore. But no one was listening. I didn't say a word, I just closed my laptop. It wasn't dramatic, no theatrical slam. Just the soft click of the lid latching shut like a gun safety being turned off. It was quiet, but the sound made the room hold its breath. I stood slowly. Took a last glance at the rack, my rack, 4 years of modular design. Custom scripts, failover nodes hand-tuned to avoid latency drift. 100 invisible redundancies that had saved this company more than once without a single thank you. But to Jace, it was just decor, furniture. He finally noticed the silence. Looked around like we were being a tough crowd. What? I'm just saying we could rethink the aesthetic. Maybe throw in some LED backlighting, make it pop. Samir exhaled sharply through his nose, half disbelief, half dread. I slid my badge into my coat pocket. Where you headed? He asked, all breezy and innocent like this was just banter between pals. Lunch, I said, and after that we'll see. He nodded, completely unaware. Thought he'd scored a point. Thought the room would relax now. He turned to the others and said, okay, let's chat about decommissioning the second node bank. If we can get that powered down, that's a mirrored cluster, Margot cut in, soft but strained. It's not cosmetic. Jace grinned, it's okay, we'll simplify. Lean is clean, right? He didn't understand what he'd done, but everyone else did, because I wasn't going to stop him. Not anymore. I walked out of the server room, past Kristen from HR who gave me a weak smile and avoided eye contact, down the hallway with its flickering ceiling panel, past the intern standing awkwardly by the vending machine, clutching a folder no one had asked for. Kept walking until the temperature shifted, and the hum of machines faded into the sterile white noise of bureaucratic airspace. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The system had already started ticking, because when I closed that laptop, I didn't just pause my work. I enacted the final trigger in a cascade I designed months ago. A system of passive failsafes, not sabotage, not malice, just what you get when you remove the human brain from a system built with care. The expiration policies were already in motion. The heartbeat tokens would start quietly failing. The certs would approach expiry. The orchestration scripts, still live but unevaluated, would begin missing their markers. And with the backup nodes already cut thanks to Jace's cost-saving brilliance, there wouldn't be a net to catch the fall. But nothing explosive would happen. Not yet. The genius of it, the cruelty, if you like, was in the delay. I'd built the system with guardrails, but Jace had spent the last 2 months ripping those out, thinking they were speed bumps. He didn't know that he'd already unscrewed the bolts from the roller coaster. That gravity was patient. He'd called it a nightlight. We'd see how bright it glowed when the power blinked. I didn't turn in a 2-week notice. Didn't gather the team for a teary farewell or post some saccharine paragraph on LinkedIn about new beginnings. That's not how you exit a war zone. That's how you get shot in the back. Instead, I printed 1 page, signed it, walked it down to legal. Clause 14C, voluntary separation triggered by hostile reassignment or public undermining of critical technical role. It wasn't flashy. Just a line buried in the weeds of my original employment contract, amended during a compliance rewrite 3 years ago. No one remembered it existed, except me and the firm's general counsel, who had signed off on it personally when I flagged the language as standard risk mitigation. It meant one thing. The moment someone in executive leadership publicly delegitimized my position, I could resign immediately, voiding my non-compete, triggering a protective severance clause, and most importantly, sealing off administrative access to certain recovery keys without violating a single internal policy. Nightlight joke, that was the trigger, the public spectacle, the knife dressed as banter. Legal didn't argue. They read the form, their brows tightened, and they handed me a stamped copy with a look that said, "I hope this wasn't a mistake." I walked out the same way I'd come in 13 years earlier. No fanfare, no entourage, just a laptop bag and a mind full of contingency maps. I didn't kill the system. I'm not a saboteur, I'm an engineer. What I did was far more elegant and far more irreversible. Back at my desk, I tapped into the authentication core and revoked a single token. That's it. 1. It wasn't even an active credential. Not in the way most people understand. It was a foundational heartbeat verification, a rotating check-in key that acted as a secondary signal to confirm the integrity of our orchestration scripts. Think of it like a ghostly fingerprint that whispers yes. I'm still here every 5 minutes to a service no one pays attention to because it never fails. Until now, revoking it didn't shut anything down. It didn't cause alarms or red lights. What it did was start a clock. A very quiet, very slow countdown. Because without that token, certain validations would begin to expire. Slowly, naturally, like a body forgetting how to breathe in its sleep. By design, those services had a grace period, failover thresholds, assumptions that the system was resilient as long as no one turned off the backups. But Jace had turned off the backups, and I'd documented it. Samir would probably notice the first hiccup in about 17 hours. Margot would catch it in the logs after that. By the time the front end started timing out and the transactional queue began to overflow, the damage would already be systemic. But none of it would trace back to me, because none of it was active sabotage. I didn't delete anything. I didn't plant malware or reroute traffic. I simply stopped holding up a piece of the sky. When you spend years holding up the beams of a building, people forget they were never built to stand alone. You become invisible, expected, background, and then someone walks in and tells you the beams are ugly, decorative, replaceable, so you let go. And the ceiling begins to sag. I left a final note in my private team channel. Locked, time-stamped. No drama. I've formally resigned, effective immediately under Clause 14C. My last system-level commit was security rotation hash F04E1A. All other services remain intact. Please refer to the Q2 continuity protocol if critical processes fail. I wish you all the best. I didn't send it to Jace. He didn't deserve the dignity. By the time he realized what was missing, the logs would tell the story. Quietly, mercilessly, with timestamps and hashes and clean exit codes. The system would remain upright for a while, but its foundation had just become theoretical. And theory, as Jace would learn, doesn't keep servers running under load. I took the long way out of the building, not because I was nostalgic. I just wanted to see if anyone would stop me, if anyone would notice. They didn't. Kristen from HR passed me in the hallway and gave a brittle little nod, like she was pretending not to read the resignation form still warm from the printer. I walked out into the parking lot, unlocked my car, and sat behind the wheel. No music, no rush, just the weight of a 13-year load slowly sliding off my shoulders. The sun was setting behind the building, casting long shadows across the loading dock where we'd once hoisted servers in by hand. It would be dark soon. Let them find the flashlight. I wasn't their nightlight anymore. It started with a flicker, barely enough to draw a glance. A minor database sync on the east node stuttered and retried. Normally, the orchestration would catch it, reschedule, reassign, and keep everything humming without a soul noticing. But the retry script didn't fire, because the orchestration layer was now blind. 3 minutes later, a routine security certificate hit its expiration threshold. It had been scheduled for auto-renewal as always, but the renewal check required an integrity ping from a heartbeat daemon, one that hadn't passed verification since I revoked the token. The cert expired. Traffic began failing silently. No big alarms, just tiny red X's in terminal windows that most of them wouldn't check until the complaints started rolling in. 6 more minutes, the orchestration layer, now assuming false negatives across multiple regions, began pulling in recovery routines that depended on cached values that had already timed out. The cascade began. Public-facing dashboards stopped refreshing. The mobile app began throwing 500 threes. Transaction queues backed up by 4, then 6, then 11 seconds. Customer support lit up like a Christmas tree. Someone in marketing pinged the company Slack. Hey, is the client portal down? Getting weird errors. Margot was the first to respond in engineering. Looking into it, Samir, seeing stale sessions. Might be a routing table issue. Then Jacob chimed in, this shouldn't even be possible. What the hell's going on with orchestration? Then came silence. Because the system wasn't just failing, it was failing perfectly. Like dominoes tipped with surgical precision. The support scripts were intact, the monitoring pings still fired, but the underlying services weren't responding in time, which meant alerts were being swallowed in just enough noise to create confusion without clarity. And every single failover trigger that should have caught it, turned off, at Jace's direction. Too much redundancy, he'd said. Too expensive. Back in the office, the IT floor was already humming with panic. I knew this because I could see their response chain unfolding in the support ticket system, which I still had read-only access to through a legacy credential no one remembered I had. Not that I was doing anything with it, I was just watching. From a coffee shop across town, window seat, oat milk latte, calm sunlight spilling across the table. The barista had just called out someone's matcha when my phone buzzed. 3 missed calls, all internal. No voicemails, just escalating desperation. I ignored them. The emails came next. First a vague "Are you available?" from Kristen, then urgent system issues from Samir, and a full-blown help from Margot with logs attached. I scanned them. They were good, sharp. She'd already figured out that the orchestration layer was locked out of the recovery daemon, but she didn't know why, couldn't know. I never documented that part. Too risky, too fragile. The CTO finally entered the Slack thread 15 minutes in, looping in ops and legal, triage in progress, status meeting in 10, Jace, silent, probably still trying to figure out which toggle to flip, which buzzword to say to make the blinking stop. I sipped my coffee, watched as the system load metrics, normally smooth and predictable, began looking like a seismograph during a quake. Transactions were now backing up by 30 seconds, then a minute, then 3. The financial engine was grinding, slowly, expensively. In the back of my mind, I wondered how long it would take them to reach the note, because I'd left one. Dramatic, not bitter. Just a single post-it stuck to the back of my monitor, yellow, ink slightly smeared from when I'd written it too fast. Restore key is in escrow with counsel upon written release by the board. I could picture Jace reading it, blinking, heart rate ticking up, and I could picture the CEO turning slowly, very slowly, toward him. Because here's the thing no one told Jace when he got his shiny VP badge. Power is easy to claim in calm water. But when systems crash, when the lights go out, people remember who knew where the switches were, and I'd built all the switches. 19 minutes after the first flicker, internal support escalated to level 1. Legal was now involved. A meeting invite hit my inbox. Emergency board session 15 min. I closed the laptop, not out of spite, just protocol. Then I looked out the window. The sun was bright. The coffee was warm. The world hadn't ended. Just their illusion of control. The first thing the CEO said when he burst into the war room was, "Where the hell is Amara?" No one answered. He was in gym clothes, still sweating, a water bottle in one hand and his phone in the other, like it might explain something if he shook it hard enough. The CTO tried to look composed but was visibly unraveling, his glasses fogged, his shirt half untucked. He was flipping through a printed copy of our infrastructure map like it was going to come alive and whisper solutions. "Why is no one answering me?" The CEO snapped. "Where is she?" Jace cleared his throat, slow to rise from his seat. "She left, resigned. When? Yesterday, I think." "Maybe this morning," he said, his voice trailing into a question. "You think?" The CEO repeated, blinking twice in disbelief. "What do you mean you think?" Kristen from HR stepped forward, tablet in hand. She submitted a clause-based voluntary separation under 14C of her contract, triggered by public undermining. "The resignation is legally valid. Immediate." The CEO froze. "Clause what?" "She added it during a compliance rewrite 3 years ago. Legal approved it. I didn't approve it." "She didn't need you to," Kristen said. "The clause was reviewed by counsel. It activates when a qualifying incident occurs." "And what the hell does that mean?" The CTO asked, finally looking up. Kristen hesitated, public diminishment of role authority or reassignment by an executive that results in disruption of technical autonomy. Everyone looked at Jace. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then looked at the floor. Okay, the CEO said, taking a slow, ragged breath. Fine, so she left, but we need access to recovery now. Key nodes are locked out. Half the services are stuck in loopback and the certs won't renew. Who else can fix this? No one answered, not right away. Then Margot said gently the redundancy script that ran our internal CA, it was triggered by a secondary token heartbeat. That heartbeat is gone. The CTO blinked. Gone how? Revoked. From root. By whom? She didn't answer. By whom? By Amara. Right before she left. The room went silent. The kind of silence you feel in your jaw. Thick, dry, static hum in the air vents. The CEO rubbed his temple. Where's the damn escalation plan? Pull it up. The CTO started. I never approved it. She submitted a draft last quarter. Jay said it was redundant. The CEO's head snapped toward him. You said it was redundant? It was redundant, Jay said defensively. It was full of doomsday hypotheticals and obscure jargon. She had us doing drills for things that hadn't happened in 10 years. That's what escalation plans are, the CTO muttered. A junior analyst from Ops, a kid named Neil, spoke up timidly. There's a note on her desk. Everyone turned. It wasn't even on the desk, really, just stuck to the side of her monitor, half curled at the edges. Yellow, ordinary, written in neat block print. Neil read it aloud. Restore key is in escrow with counsel upon written release by the board. The CEO paled, not just surprised, gut-punched. He turned to legal, who was already dialing. Is that true? He asked. The voice on speaker was flat, professional. Yes. The decryption token for the root service configuration was placed into legal escrow this morning per Clause 14C. Release requires a majority board vote and a formal written request citing breach or critical need. The language was pre-approved, and Amara, she followed policy. The CTO staggered back into a chair. She didn't sabotage us. No, Margot said. She didn't destroy anything. She just stopped holding it up. It was such a small sentence, but it dropped like a boulder. The CEO's face went tight. He turned slowly, very slowly, to Jace. You cost me my architect, he said, barely above a whisper. You took the spine out of the system because you thought it looked old. It was old, Jace hissed, outdated, overbuilt. Half of it wasn't even documented. That's because she was the documentation, the CTO snapped. Kristen scrolled through her tablet. She left a full audit trail. System notes, trigger logs, legal handoff receipts, it's all clean. The CEO ran both hands over his face, eyes wild and scanning. Then what are we waiting for? Call a vote, get the board in here. She gave us the map, Margot said quietly. We're just stuck because none of us ever bothered to learn how to read it. In the corner, dashboard monitor blinked red. Another service offline. The room moved as one, papers shuffled, calls made, chairs scraped back. But underneath it all was a different kind of movement, a shifting weight, a realization rising like bile. This wasn't a fire. This was the fire alarm going off and no one knowing where the exit was. And Amara, she wasn't missing. She just wasn't answering. They passed the post-it around like it was radioactive, holding it by the edges, as if touching Amara's handwriting might trigger another meltdown. Kristen confirmed its authenticity by comparing it to her personnel file, which, of course, was still perfectly up to date. The note hadn't just been written this morning, it had been waiting for this morning. Folded, filed, timed, Amara had laid the breadcrumbs with surgical intent. Restore key is in escrow with counsel upon written release by the board. Short, precise, inevitable. Legal was already dialed in via speakerphone, their tone glacial with subtext. We received the protocol trigger at 10:06 a.m. The key was transferred to secure escrow, as outlined in Clause 14C subsection E. Per her contract, access may only be granted via written authorization by majority board vote. No unilateral overrides permitted. CEO looked like someone had just handed him a scalpel and asked him to perform heart surgery on his own company. He turned to legal like a man drowning in procedure. You're telling me we can't get access? I can't get access. Correct, came the reply. The custody chain is sealed. Unseal it, he growled. I can't, legal said flatly. Only the board can, and only in session. He stepped back from the table and pressed both hands into the edge of the conference room wall, forehead lowered like he needed to squeeze an alternate solution out of drywall. His breath came shallow, jaw tight. The CTO muttered under his breath, Jesus. She built this like a bunker, because that's what it was. Amara didn't break the system. She just removed herself from its center and made damn sure no one else could fake her fingerprint. The multi-factor decryption token wasn't some USB stick. It was a dynamic hash-layered key string generated from 5 separate service maps, 2 of which only she had kept in non-centralized knowledge trees. When she left, the fingerprint vanished. Not because she was trying to punish anyone, but because she planned for the day they would try to punish her. Jace shifted in his seat, trying to disappear into the upholstery. The CTO was staring him down now. Margot wouldn't even look at him. The CEO finally turned toward him. You killed the failsafes. No, Jace said, eyes wide. No, I improved them. I streamlined. She was too cautious, over-engineered everything. The CTO laughed once, no humor in it. You removed the lifeboats because the ship hadn't sunk yet. Her protocols were obsolete. Jace insisted, this is sabotage. No, Kristen said, her voice tight. This is policy. She wrote it. You signed off on it. We even called it covering her ass in the margin notes. Legal chimed in again, unaware of the tension in the room. Additionally, Clause 14C was implemented following a prior compliance review where Amara's infrastructure designs were deemed to hold disproportionate criticality risk without a formal succession plan. The clause was a stopgap, approved unanimously. The CEO closed his eyes. Of course. Amara had seen this day coming, not just a disaster. But this one? She hadn't just guessed that someone like Jace would arrive, she had architected the system to tolerate it, with rules, with logs, with just enough rope to let the fool hang himself. Board session is in 50 minutes, legal added. I'll need a formal motion from your office to place the release on the agenda. The CEO said nothing, just nodded once, sharp and bitter. Jace opened his mouth again. I didn't mean for shut up, the CEO barked. And that was it, the temperature shifted. He wasn't the new blood anymore. He was the infection. They were going to bleed him out. You could feel it in the way the CTO leaned back, suddenly no longer shielding him. You could see it in the way Kristen stopped taking notes. You could hear it in the rustle of chairs as the executives prepared for the boardroom, not as a meeting, but as an execution chamber. Jace fumbled. I was trying to modernize, you were trying to get her out. Argo said coldly. You called the servers decorative, Jacob muttered. She warned you, the CTO snapped. She wrote the memos, she filed the risks, you laughed. And that's when Jace realized there would be no defense, no PowerPoint, no scapegoat. He was the scapegoat. The CEO straightened his jacket, already halfway out the door. Send the vote to the board, he said, draft a release motion, and prep a termination packet for Jace, effective immediately. But don't say another word, the CEO warned, not even looking back. You've said enough. Down the hallway, screens flickered again, more services slipping. And still, Amara remained silent, not unreachable, just not interested. The phone rang while she was folding her boarding pass in half, edge to edge, the way she always did before flying. It was muscle memory, like checking her pockets or tapping the gate number twice with her index finger. Rituals for letting go. She looked down at the screen. Not a name, just a New York area code and a corporate prefix she recognized instantly. She picked up, not because she was curious, but because she already knew what this call was. Amara, a polished voice said, warm and efficient, we've been watching. A pause, we've read your logs, the audit trails, the failover policies. The way you wrote in kill switch clauses without ever needing to use them. That's not just engineering, that's discipline. Another pause, like the caller wanted to be sure she was listening. You've built something resilient, something few people know how to do anymore. We'd like you to bring that resilience here. Amara didn't respond right away. She just leaned back in the hard plastic terminal chair, watching people drag suitcases across the linoleum like ants carting their lives in zippered nylon. Children running in circles. A flight attendant laughing into her phone. No interview, she asked. Don't need one, the voice replied. The work speaks for itself, and it had. Not in headlines, not in flair. But in silence, the kind of silence you earn when your systems don't crash, your customers don't panic, and your team sleeps through the night without pager duty lighting up like a Christmas tree. The kind of silence that makes weak men forget you're there until you aren't. I'll have my assistant send over the offer, the voice said. Full CTO role. Autonomy guaranteed. And Amara? Yes. Don't build it for us, he said, unless we deserve it. She ended the call without saying goodbye. Back at her old company, the boardroom was suffocating. Jace was trying to look smaller, like maybe if he hunched enough, they'd forget his name was on every denied risk memo. Legal laid down Amara's original report, thick, thorough, time-stamped 3 months before his first change order. The CTO didn't even open it, just pointed at the top page, which read in bold, Key Recovery and Escalation Risk, Orchestration Lockout Scenario. It was dated, signed, forwarded to all executive inboxes, including Jace's. The room was silent until the CEO said, flat and final, get out. Jace stood, slowly, quietly, no dramatic speeches, just the rustle of shame against an expensive blazer. He turned once as if someone might defend him. No one did, as he walked out. The board turned to the CEO. He looked tired now, not angry, just worn, like a man who'd realized the cost of underestimating the only person in the room who never raised her voice. I want her back, he said. She's not coming back, the CTO replied. We'll pay whatever she asks. At gate 17, Amara boarded her flight. The plane wasn't full, and the sun was beginning to set, casting pink streaks across the tarmac. She slid into the window seat, buckled in, and opened her phone one last time before takeoff. There it was, one message. From the CEO, no greeting, no punctuation, just 5 words. We'll pay whatever she asks. She stared at it for a long moment, not out of surprise, but out of quiet, distant satisfaction. Then she powered off the phone and let the plane take her somewhere else. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.